Welcome back to the latest edition of Until Saturday. I'm Ari Wasserman, joined by Chris Fanini and Kenny the Man. How do you want to be called? Kenny the Man?
Yeah, we'll go with Kenny. We'll go with Kenny the Man.
Kennington Smith. Appreciate you, Alabama beat writer. It was a terrible luck on my end. I was in Santa Barbara for the weekend with my wife, and the day before we left, Nick Saban retired, and it let down this huge rabbit hole of other moves and different things. And of course, when the GOAT retires, it's just bad luck for me. So this podcast is going to be a little bit of history. We have Kenny here to take us through some of the Alabama stuff. We have Chris Vanini to help pull me back from the ledge and explain some of the things that I missed. And we're going to talk a little bit about Jedd Fisch leaving Washington or Arizona to go to Washington after Alabama quickly replaced Nick Saban with Washington Kalen DeBoer. 3 major coaching moves over the weekend. Programs reacted quickly, and it's a pretty big tidal wave in the sport. Other news, of course, too, is Ryan Grubb and Courtney Morgan, moving on from Washington as well, and initial impressions of that, and a bunch of transfer portal news, recruiting news, all happening while I was in the California sunshine. There's a lot to happen here. JJ McCarthy went to the NFL. Quinn Ewers came back. Sarkisian at Texas. Steve Sarkisian had a contract extension, and there's so much stuff that I missed that I can't even get this intro to go off smoothly. So apologize for that. But before we get started, be sure to follow the podcast on Apple or wherever you listen to podcasts. Please help support the show by leaving a 5-star review. If you leave a question with that review, we'll do our best to answer it on the show. If you're watching on the YouTube channel live right now, we appreciate it. If you're listening in podcast form and you would like to see us live, be sure to follow the YouTube channel. The links to the podcast and the YouTube channel can be found in the show's description. Subscribe to Until Saturday in both and interact with the channels on both. And lastly, leave us a voicemail for Sunday Sound Off Podcast, 316-462-9852. And why don't we jump in here to the first segment, Kenny? You're going to come along for the ride because this happened more recently, but Jedd Fisch left Arizona after a wonderful 2-year stint that made a hopeless program relevant to be the head coach at Washington. We have initial reaction. I wrote a column that I kind of stand by, but also think is flawed that I want to talk about on the show a little bit. And I just don't really know what the solution is to some of these things for the Arizona program. But first, what does Jedd Fisch bring to the table compared to other candidates? Lance Leipold from Kansas apparently was part of that situation as well. He is returning to Kansas. There's lots of turnover at Washington. Per Max Olson, potentially 9 of the 11 starters on the Washington offense will not be back next season. Dylan Johnson, Romo Dunze, Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan, Michael Penix Jr. Those are some pretty big names that helped them make the national championship game that will not be on the team next year. And Braylon Trice declared, and Jabbar Muhammad is transferring from the defense. So sorry for the long-winded intro. We're going to calm it down a little bit here. But Chris, what is your take on the last 72 hours in college football?
Doesn't it feel like Michigan won the national championship like a month ago?
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
It was a week ago. It was 1 week ago. We've had 7 different news cycles since then. Every single day has had one. The season truly never stops in the sport, but my goodness, we have moved past Michigan winning the national championship so quickly. It feels like forever ago. Several coaching dominoes, like you said. We'll get to Kalen DeBoer in Alabama in a minute. But Jedd Fisch, Washington, the most recent one that happened. It was a natural name as soon as the job came open. Look, Washington feels like it can be and is maybe a top 10 job. They just played for the national championship. Chris Peterson took them to the playoff back in 2016. They're going to the Big Ten. It's a beautiful place. There is a lot to like about that job. Jedd Fisch, a guy who has moved around a lot, a guy who I was skeptical of when he got the Arizona job. Ari, I don't know how you felt when he got the job.
I think everybody was skeptical of it. I don't know. Yeah. It wasn't like when he was hired that everybody was like, hooray, this is the right guy. This is it. We've reached Mecca. I think that it took some winning, but it seemed very early on that he was going to get it.
Yeah, and goes 1-11 that first year, improves I think to 5-7 maybe the second year, but the recruiting had clearly picked up in a major way, and they were showing improvement. They have the breakthrough season this year, win 10 games. Noah Fifita becomes a breakout player at quarterback, and things are looking good. Arizona, we're thinking preseason top 10 team for next year after the dumpster fire.
Big 12 conference favorite, maybe.
Yeah, so considering the dumpster fire he took over from Kevin Sumlin, 0-5 in 2020, the 70-7 loss to Arizona State, like you can't deny he built that thing up, and he built it up pretty quickly. So if you're Washington, yeah, this is basically a rebuilding job, not only on offense, but they're losing at the moment like 18 starters from that national championship game are either in the end or going to the NFL or are in the portal. So it's going to have to be an overhaul anyway. It makes a lot of sense, but Jedd Fisch, by the way, has not been at a job for more than 3 years since 2007 when he was with the Baltimore Ravens from 04 to 07. So it's a guy who moves around a lot. Sure, if he does well at Washington, the NFL will come calling. Who knows if Florida opens as well down the road, but I think it's a good hire for Washington.
I have so much to unpack here, guys, so just indulge me. I'm not going to fumble around. I'm locked in now. Okay, first of all, you cannot be mad at Jedd Fisch. The guy went from 3.25 to over $7.5 million annually in his salary, and he has a 7-year deal at Washington. And Washington is an unmistakable upgrade of a job from Arizona. We can all agree on that. Coaches need to take those opportunities when they're presented. In my head, there was this notion that he would go back to Arizona, have another good year in the Big 12, maybe win the Big 12 because of the team that they're bringing back, and then bolt to Florida next year because it seems like Billy Napier's on thin ice at Florida. That, to me, was the thought process going into it, that would be the way that this would go. But Jedd Fisch isn't in an opportunity where you can risk that if you have a bird in the hand that's as good as this bird. Like Washington is a good bird. That said, as interesting as Washington bouncing back and trying to compete and make the playoff again next year after all they're losing is a topic that we should discuss. I have this notion because I went to Arizona. Everybody knows it. The group chat is buzzing right now. And the one question I have for you guys, and then I'll continue, is if you are a fan of a program like Arizona and you have a coach who comes in, speaks your language, understands how to get people's hopes up, understands how to bring in players of a caliber that this place didn't do in the past, has a breakthrough season, wins 10 games after only winning 1 2 years ago, leaves this place and goes to another place, and then presumably takes the players that helped Arizona get to that spot with him. What is the point of rooting for a place like U of A? Like, what's the point? Even if you climb the mountain and you get somewhere that's better, someone else is just going to come take it from you. And they're not only going to take your coach now, they're going to take your players. So if you're an Arizona fan, or if you're a Kansas fan who enjoyed this run and Lance Leipold would have taken the job, what are you rooting for? Like, that's the thing that I want to understand first, because I came up with the solution and I hate the solution. And I wrote it in a column and people are killing me today. But it's the only solution outside of a collective bargaining agreement that I can come up with, which is employment, which solves all of the issues. And I probably should have written a line in there that says this is not the best issue or solution, but the only solution if we don't have a CBA. But my solution is if a coach leaves, players can transfer in that 30-day window, but they can't go to the place the coach left for, to stop places like Washington from pillaging Arizona's roster and keeping fans engaged. So if that's crazy, because you can't limit players' ability, and I agree with that, what's the point of rooting for Arizona, and what do you do to fix it?
I mean, what's the point? I guess it just kind of depends on why you're rooting for them in the first place. Like, are you an alum? Are you from the state of Arizona? Do you have family ties there? That would probably be my
It's hard, Kenny, because you went to Georgia and you covered Alabama. And like I went to Arizona and I was like a student journalist there. So I never really connected with the sports the way normal students do, because I was trying to be a sports writer. But the thing that's difficult is it feels hopeless to me. And sports are about hope. You know, we got a Lions fan on the podcast right now, Chris Vanini from Detroit. They've sucked for 40 years. And now there's hope, but there's always hope. They're good this year. There's hope. I don't know if you have anything to grab on. What's the hope at Arizona? They go hire another coach. He is good for a year. takes them away before they can be great, and then their players leave and they start over again. It seems like a awful existence under the current way the sport is built.
What Arizona is feeling, what the Big 12 as a whole will probably be feeling. Lance Leipold's name comes up for jobs all the time. Chris Kleiman's name at Kansas State, his name comes up for jobs all the time. The ACC, if you're outside of Clemson and Florida State, basically this is the life of a Group of Five fan. This is what you have experienced your entire life, which is you have a coach who wins, and that means he's gone. And that is what Group of Five schools have had trouble with for a very long time, keeping fans engaged, keeping donors engaged, continuing to sell people hope. And it is tough. And the transfer portal and the multi-time transfers and the no sitting out stuff, that has ratcheted up even more so. And another, like, obviously free movement of players every year is a new thing to college football. It's nothing that really any sport has to deal with. But the other thing that most pro sports don't have to deal with is coaches leaving like this. NFL coaches don't take other jobs and buy out their own contracts. It's a contract. You know, you're stuck there. Bill Belichick couldn't just leave the Patriots to go take another job. He has to be fired essentially or traded. But college football coaching contracts have never been set up that way. And the money is so high and thrown around so much, it doesn't make any sense to anybody who's not in college sports that this is the way things work. And so what is the solution? At this point, hope you hire a new coach and you can start things over. That's basically all you can do and all it's going to be moving forward, because the SEC and the Big Ten are going to have so much more money, which, by the way, Washington doesn't even have more money right now. They're going to the Big Ten with a 50% share. So they're not even there yet. But to get one of those spots on the musical chairs, so to speak, if you're in the SEC and the Big Ten, that's the place to be. And that's not going to change. And I think the Big 12 as a whole is going to realize this. It's why consolidation is not good for the sport. It's why everybody going to do conferences is not good for the sport. So, Ari, I feel for Arizona and what their fans are going through. And they're feeling what a lot of Group of Five and other places have been feeling for a long time. And I don't think it's generally good that this consolidation leads to stuff like this.
So is the only solution collective bargaining agreement?
Yes. It's to have players under contract, like coaches, although again, coaches are getting out of their contracts, but if players had to pay a buyout to get out of their contract to go to another school, that could be a solution. Yes. So that is a road that college sports may be going down. And so, yes, that's probably your best solution at this point.
Yeah. So I tried to attempt at coming up with a solution that isn't collective bargaining agreement, because I think there could just be one single thing that fixes college football, and that's just make the players employees. And then all these crazy transfer portal issues, coaching change issues are alleviated. But that's not the case right now, and it's not going to be the case. It's just a tough perspective to be in. And I think people think, well, this guy went to Arizona, he's upset. I'm not upset. I never really understood the point of being an Arizona fan even before this happened, because I'm all about winning championships and competing for the college football playoff. But they actually had a chance to make the playoff next year, so I feel bad for everybody who is involved in that. Mm-hmm. And the thing that stinks about the direction that college football is heading in is that I feel bad for a lot of people. And you don't think that would come from somebody who's so, pie in the sky, stars, powerhouse, oriented, but I do. I think that the best thing about the 12-team playoff and, the fact that the Group of Five or the former Group of Five and access to it keeps fans engaged is the best part about the expansion. I don't know if I love it competitively, but the fact that other people get to feel a part of the system, makes me feel good. But it's a very interesting situation. And I just feel for fans who are at the bottom of the food chain. And if you're at the bottom or the middle of the food chain, a bigger fish is going to come. Somebody left a comment here that said, well, Alabama, everybody wants their players and coaches too. Well, Alabama's where you end up. It's not where you leave. That's, not the case. I don't feel bad for Alabama if their players leave, because people want to go there. So, Noah Fafita, the quarterback, and T-Mac Tetairoa McMillan, who I think is going to be a first-round draft pick at receiver, are very, very, very much probably on the board to leave. And if they leave to Washington, then Washington might be a very good football team again next year, which solves all the issues that we were talking about. But guys, is part of what makes Jedd Fisch attractive in the short term what he can bring in the short term? If those players come?
Yeah, I think so. When you talk about the players not being able to follow their coach, I guess my retort to that would be, is that not the only reason they went to Arizona? Was to play for Jeff?
The quarterback was very much into loyalty with Jedd Fisch because they were the first and I believe only for a while to offer him, and then they were awesome. So I think there is a loyalty to the head coach. McMillan was committed elsewhere before, and then there was a coaching change at Oregon and ended up at Arizona. But these guys are guys that could have left in December to go play for Texas or Florida or whatever they wanted, and they didn't, based on loyalty. And what they got in return is their coach left. And maybe what they're going to get in return is a new spot at Washington with their coach. But, I like to think about this, guys. Could Noah Fifita be the starting quarterback at Ohio State next year if he entered the portal? Think about the opportunities that these guys could have probably had because of how good they are. And these guys usually aren't at Arizona. And they aren't going to be there very longer either if you can read the tea leaves. So, okay.
This is the thought for every head coaching hire though now, because the state attorneys general pushback and the multi-transfer thing is now open and you can transfer as many times as you want. That is taken into account with any coaching hire. If I hire this coach, how many of his guys can he bring with him? Quarterback, receiver, whatever position. And yeah, that's a factor, I think, in terms of any coach you have. Now, Washington technically has no scholarship quarterbacks at the moment because Will Rogers is in the portal. Austin Mack's in the portal. Dylan Morris is going to James Madison. Now you can get those guys back, some of them. But if you get Noah Fifita to come with you, then you're good. That's just how it is now.
Yeah. So I don't know if the restricting the players to transfer with the coach rule is the ideal scenario. Maybe give a 1 year buffer.
Yeah, it's
stop this.
Yeah,
what are we going to do?
Yeah. I get your feeling. I get what you want to do. It's not going to happen for obvious
reasons. It can't happen, I don't think.
Right. You're right. It can't happen for those reasons. It's much better than the days when the coaches used to prevent. We're not that long removed from when coaches could limit where players would transfer. Do you remember those days? The player would submit a list and the coach would say yes or no. You couldn't go to our conference opponents and all this kind of stuff. Now it's gone so far in the other direction where everybody can go anywhere, wherever they want. And I don't think either of those ends is good.
What would be sick is if a person like Kalen DeBoer went to Alabama, and this is going to be a good segment where Kenny can really cook here in the next segment. But Kalen DeBoer goes to Alabama, acquires all these 5-star players, and then takes the Arizona job and brings all his players there and just rocks shit in the Big 12. Could that happen? If you took all the best players from the hardest conference and the hardest schedule ever and then went to a lower tier school and then had all these animals coming off the bus at U of A, that would be a pretty easy path to the playoff. I don't know. Yeah. I just want to say that I'm sorry, Arizona fans. It's tough. It's difficult. And I feel your pain. I understand that. But unfortunately, as we live in this current reality, we have to acknowledge that it's tough. But here's the one thing. We have some Arizona candidates, and the one thing that I needs to be clear is the benchmark of elite level programs is the ability to not only hire one good coach, but to also hire other ones when a coach leaves. The competency is sometimes or oftentimes at the athletic director level and the president level. Now, Arizona is also in a $250 million budget deficit because of a miscalculation, which sounds like something that would happen in Enron, but it happened. So here are some coaching candidates that we can discuss real quick. And Chris, you're really good at this. You do the lists every time there's a job opening. Brent Brennan from San Jose State, Jake Dickert from Wazoo, Barry Odom at UNLV, Brendan Carroll, which is Pete's son, and the offensive coordinator at Arizona, but could be moving on to Washington staff. G.J. Kenny from Texas State, Brennan Marion, the UNLV offensive coordinator, and Will Stein, the Oregon offensive coordinator. Which ones, Chris, speak to you, and how would you kind of go about that?
So I talked to someone who said Arizona seems to already kind of have its group of what they want to do, and are obviously going to move very quickly on this. Brent Brennan, I think, stands out among the group. He was a finalist for the job last time it opened. That is a incredibly difficult job at San Jose State. He has a winning record 3 of the last 4 years. He has had a good relationship with Dick Tomey, the legendary coach out in the West with Arizona, San Jose State, and whatnot. Won the Mountain West in 2020, was a GA at Arizona, I think, in 2000. So I think he stands out as a guy who has done more with less, and that is what Arizona typically needs. Barry Odom as well, I think, did a really, really good job at UNLV this season. 9-5, their best record in 40 years. He's been an SEC coach, an SEC defense coordinator, so knows the recruiting game and stuff like that. And then I do think Brendan Carroll will probably be in the mix. He's been a coach for a while, at Miami, at USC, with the Seahawks, at Arizona. So he's been around the block, had a closer relationship with Jedd Fisch. I think those names stand out. Will Stein as well, the Oregon offensive coordinator. Ari, as an Arizona guy, does any of that stand out to you? What do you want in an Arizona coach? Our good friend Bill Landis suggested you for the job. He said it's time to bring Ari Wasserman home to Arizona, but
I'll do it.
What do you think would work there?
I think I'd be a good CEO as long as I didn't have to come up with like play calls, offensive or defensive strategy or philosophy or anything else. I think I'd be good at hiring really good player assistants and allowing the assistants to do what they do. And I think I'd be a good ambassador for the program.
That's a good pitch. Do you like any of those candidates?
And that'd be cheaper. Here's the thing. Yeah. I would want a candidate that could do everything in their power to piggyback off of what Jedd Fisch did. I think that the hardest thing in coaching hires, and we're going to get to you, Kenny, I promise, because this is an important thing with Alabama as we move forward, is to understand the job that they have, where they are, what needs to be done in order to accumulate as much talent as possible to build a team. Like Arizona didn't go from a 1-win team to a 10-win team because Jedd Fisch is the most X's and O's genius you've ever seen. They went there because their players got a lot better. They have first-round draft picks on their offense now. In years past, they didn't have any good players. We're talking about a program that's 3 or 4 years removed from signing a recruiting class with only one top 1,000 player in it. So what was the blueprint? It was to activate, the hope by going all in on Tucson, trying to get the NIL on the same page with the local businesses by recruiting a certain type of player that understands what Arizona is and what it has to sell, and going all in on U of A. It's a vacation spot. Tucson's great. It's a great place to go to school. Like all the things that Jedd Fisch, did with bringing Rob Gronkowski back and, former players, the Desert Swarm guy.
By the way, Teddy Bruschi was the executive, assistant to the head coach or something. I just was going through their staff and he just popped up there. I didn't even
They did everything he could to find previous successful Arizona tenures and make it feel like a winner again. They only recruited players from teams that won in high school. They did everything they could to remove the loser mentality from the program, and it worked. They won 10 games. And, I look at a guy like GJ Kenny, who took a team that didn't they have a terrible, terrible season a few years ago and then were awesome this year. I like the idea of somebody who's built something, but I also feel like you need to have a certain personality and a certain way of recruiting that helps continue that. So this is the Kenny had the most wins in Texas State history this past season.
He also brought in 50 transfers.
Yeah, didn't he sign a class there that only had 0 or 1 player in the high school class or something? Was that Texas State?
Well, that was Texas State before he got there. But they brought in a ton of transfers, a lot of his guys from Incarnate Word. It was a mix of high school, but a lot of transfers. So he's kind of done that whole thing.
All right, Kenny, let's cook. Kalen DeBoer, introductory press conference impressions, his staff, and departing players. I'm going to go take a nap. The floor is yours for a half hour. What is your impressions of the... First of all, let me just ask you this, bud. You're on the Alabama beat for not even, is it a year now? Is it just becoming a year?
It's been
and the GOAT retires. What were you doing when the news popped, and how was your weekend?
True story. It was my birthday, the day that Saban retired. And
What a loser! No, I'm kidding. That sucks, man. I hate to see that.
I was halfway to Atlanta to meet my family dinner, and dinner got canceled. I spent my birthday at Starbucks in Bessemer, Alabama. Writing and
birthday,
trying
man.
to put this together.
That sucks. I shouldn't have laughed, man. That's actually a
happy
sad
birthday
story.
though.
Appreciate it. Appreciate it. So that's what I was doing.
If it makes you feel better, when I was a young journalist, and I think how old are you? You're like 23, right?
29 as of 5 days ago.
Oh God, you have such a young face.
Appreciate it.
What a handsome man. I was 23. So way less experienced than you. When Jim Tressel got fired was Memorial Day morning, and I was very, very drunk on Sunday and slept till like 1 p.m. on Monday and missed the whole thing. So and I was on the Ohio State beat. So if that makes you feel better, hopefully you can make up your birthday, Kenny.
Yeah, well, we got coaching carousel, then we got spring practice, and then summer recruiting. So maybe like the dead period. What's that? Late July? I think I'll celebrate my birthday.
Yeah, it's a half birthday. People
half
do that.
birthday, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
but you did a lot of really good work, Kenny, despite that stuff, and it really stinks that happened to you. And that's the worst part about being a sports writer is you never know when that's going to happen. But what are your impressions of what happened with Nick Saban? What are your impressions of the hire, and how do you feel Alabama is equipped to move forward under all this?
Yeah, I think, initially, obviously, the first reaction is shock that it happened. I think for a lot of us who have just been kind of following this for a while, you felt like Saban's retirement was probably coming sooner than later. I don't think any of us expected that it was going to happen right when it happened. And I think you have to give athletic director Greg Byrne a lot of credit for being able to mobilize as quickly as he did. Right after Saban spoke with the team on that 4 p.m. on Wednesday, Greg Byrne walked in, spoke to the players. He said, give me 72 hours. And he hired Kalen DeBoer in 49 hours. So with about a day to spare, he had a new man. And by all accounts, Kalen DeBoer was near the top of the list. Greg Byrne flew out of Tuscaloosa on that Wednesday night. He flew to Seattle, interviewed Kalen DeBoer on Thursday, and Kalen DeBoer was in Tuscaloosa on Friday. So happened really fast. They identified a top candidate. They moved aggressively on it, and they had to because the transfer portal is open, and we're starting to see Bama players defect. Isaiah Bond being the most prominent one, who was in line to be their number one receiver this year, and enters a portal, goes to Texas. So time was of the essence. I think they did a really good job of, again, mobilizing, strategizing, and bringing in their guy. And as far as Kalen DeBoer, I just think confidence is probably the biggest thing that stuck out to me. And, the whole who wants to follow Nick Saban and who wants to, step into that role, he seems very comfortable just kind of walking into it. And I think what stuck out to me the most was how much he's embracing the fact that Saban is going to be very involved in the program. When he spoke at his intro press conference, one thing he said was Nick Saban is going to have 100% access to the program. And then he goes on to say, in fact, I'm going to effectively demand Nick Saban to come to me every single day and tell me one thing that we can get better at today. And he said, he's probably going to tell us 10 things, and that's fine with me, but I want him to come to me and tell me something every single day. So he's embracing the fact that Saban is who he is. He's the greatest of all time, and he wants him to be around, and he wants him to be involved in the program. And he's embracing all of that. And as far as where Alabama goes from here, obviously it's going to take all-in effort from all parts to replace Nick Saban and to try to keep Alabama at their current level. I think one thing that was notable in the last few days is their NIL collective. It's a subscription-based collective, and they've gained almost 1,000 new members since Kalen DeBoer has been hired. So there's been a call out for, more support for the program, more NIL dollars, because players are not going to take the Saban discount anymore. So Bama's going to have to play a little bit of, they're going to have to play some ball. I mean, there are kids who went to Alabama and took less money because they're going to get developed by Nick Saban. Yeah. And up until this year, it was a guarantee that you're going to win a national championship. This was the first recruiting class of players who have spent 3 years in the program that didn't win one. So the recruiting pitch is play for the greatest of all time, win a national championship. More than likely, you're going to the league if you stick through the process. And because of that, you're going to have to take less on the front end. Well, that recruiting pitch doesn't exist anymore. Not to say that it won't down the road, but Kalen DeBoer is going to have to provide some proof of concept to get these, high-level recruits to trust him and believe in his vision. So I think that was a very significant development as well. So it's kind of I feel like I'm talking out of all sides here, but there's been a quick moving process and a lot of things to discuss. And the last thing I'll say is Travaris Robinson. It looks like, according to Chris Lowe, he's staying at Georgia, which is a sizable development. I mean, Travaris Robinson, beloved in the program, and I know Alabama did everything that they could to try to keep him in the building, and what he did on the field, what he does on the recruiting trail, leaving that building. So huge win for Georgia, obviously, and a huge blow to Alabama, what they want to build on that defensive staff.
It's a good segue, Kenny, because there's a lot of stuff that we have to get through, and then I'm going to let Chris get his take, and then I've got a really hot take that I've been thinking about all weekend that we'll get to. But like you said, Robinson left Alabama and went to Georgia, then re-interviewed back at Alabama, decided to stay at Georgia. There's going to be some implications for Caleb Downs, the freshman All-American safety, and what this means for some of the defections that could happen to Alabama. Isaiah Bond, as you mentioned, made a business decision with Nick Saban retiring and went to Texas. Kind of reminds me of like an Xavier Worthy type player that might fit well in with the Longhorns and how it's doing. Some notable players that are returning, per Kenny's story, are quarterback Jalen Milroe, running back Justice Haynes, tight end CJ Dupree, and a bunch of offensive linemen, including Caden Proctor. Notable departures on offense: Roydale Williams and Chase McClellan, the talented running back, receiver Isaiah Bond, Seth McLaughlin, the center that had some issues snapping the ball, and right tackle J.C. Latham. Alabama is losing a lot of talent, both on offense and on defense, but there is a lot of things that are going through my mind about the DeBoer hire. But Chris, you were going to talk. I'm going to let you go first, and then I have to get this. I've been thinking about it all weekend, and I have to say it.
Before we get into the program stuff, I want to talk Kalen DeBoer stuff. And Kenny mentioned the confidence he came in with. And I think, when you're 104-12 as a coach in your career, that's probably a big part of it. Like very few people could come into Nick Saban's shoes and be like, man, the pressure to win is so high here. How am I going to handle this? That is all Kalen DeBoer has known, like as a coach. He went 25-3 at Washington. He went 9-3 in his second year, his first full year at Fresno State. He went 67-3 at Sioux Falls at the NAI level. So this is a guy who only knows winning. And I think that is a positive from that point. And to the idea of Nick Saban hanging around, that is a lot of pressure, but Nick Saban is going to be breaking down that defensive back film. He's going to be going through what you guys are running on the back end. He's going to have his tips. He's going to be involved in that. And look, if you have a defensive back secondary consultant like Nick Saban in your building, that's a pretty good guy to bounce some stuff off of. So I do think that will be good. But also, it is fascinating to me, and I've thought about writing about this, but that Nick Saban, to not have a Nick Saban protege take this job was kind of stunning.
I'd read about that.
And I think it's because he did too good of a job at developing head coaches. Compare this to Bill Belichick, who's had a long coaching tree that's been mostly terrible. And yet, when he leaves the Patriots, and they had it in Gerard Mayo's contract, reportedly, that he would replace Bill Belichick in his contract. Alabama has former coaches Dan Lanning, Steve Sarkisian, Kirby Smart. Those are three guys who are at jobs that
Kirby Smart should be the guy. Yeah, I mean
because he was good enough to get Kirby Smart to a job like Georgia, Dan Lanning eventually to a job like Oregon, Steve Sarkisian to Texas. Like those are jobs you don't necessarily leave for Alabama, which did not happen. Then you have the other guys like Jimbo Fisher flamed out, Mark D'Antonio retired, Lane Kiffin still probably too immature for this job like this. And it's so interesting to me that for everything that Nick Saban built, for the ways he changed college football, for his fingers being across the entire sport, that they couldn't get one of his guys to come back and take this job because Nick Saban had put coaches at the highest levels of the sport is fascinating. And so it ends up coming down to a guy like Kalen DeBoer, who has not been in the South before, who hasn't recruited at the SEC level before. And it sets Alabama up for a really interesting, unknown future. Ari, you're raising your hand. What do you
got? And that's my antenna going up when you started talking. Yeah. I love Kalen DeBoer. Let's just start there. When he went for it on 4th down and 1 from his own 29-yard line against Wazoo,
I've heard you like that
beautiful play. I wanted to frame that play like above my headboard in my bedroom. Like it was the perfect everything I like stand for as a college football fan is being confident, doing things that you think are right, having the perfect play in the crazy moment, and actually entrusting your players to do what you know that they could do. What he did at Washington this year was absolutely insane in terms of getting them to the national championship game in an era where I didn't think it was possible. He has won everywhere that he has gone, and I love everything that this man's about, and he's a genuinely good person. That said,
I'm
not necessarily sure, and this isn't it's not Kalen DeBoer's fault. What candidate makes you feel good when Saban leaves? None, right? Like there's nobody that they could hire. Maybe outside of Dan Lanning, who's a little bit more experienced in the recruiting realm, that makes you think, okay, well, this is a good hire. I am absolutely and utterly dumbfounded by the notion that a person with as little experience at the Power 5 level could parlay that experience and success at the Power 5 level into the Alabama job. And not just the Alabama job, the taking over for Nick Saban job. And I'm not saying it's a bad hire. I'm not saying he's not going to win. All he's done is win. But I get very, very nervous in my plums when I start talking about a coach who has spent a large portion of his career in the Pacific Northwest, who has never signed a 5-star prospect, who has a recruiting coordinator in Courtney Morgan, who told me on the phone last week that taking top 100 players at Alabama is not recruiting because there's not as much evaluation. When you start talking like that, and I'm not saying Courtney Morgan isn't great. I just wrote a story about how he helped build 2. We're going to get to that. But there is an evaluation piece that involves 3 stars, like Mason Graham on the defensive line at Michigan, that is not going to sit well in Tuscaloosa. We are talking about a program that signed 9 5-star prospects in a single recruiting class. A program that has won the recruiting crown like 10 out of the last 13 years. A program that won the recruiting crown 7 years in a row. A program that has won a national championship for every 3-year player up until this past year because it recruits so crazily good. The transfer portal is changing things. NIL is changing things. I know the 247 Sports composite isn't necessarily the same predictive tool as it has been in the past. But the person who is taking over for Nick Saban, the best recruiter in the history of college football, is not a dog of a recruiter. That scares the ever-loving shit out of me.
And it's
especially considering what happened at Auburn.
And it's because as much as everyone will always try to spin, we hired our number 1 choice. No, you didn't. And it's okay that you didn't. Pete Carroll was like USC's 5th choice the year he got the job. You know, like sometimes these things work out, but it didn't happen because Kirby Smart was at a better job in Georgia. Steve Sarkisian was at probably a better job in Texas, and Dan Lanning's at Oregon, which is, I know I probably would have taken the job if I was Dan Lanning, but Oregon's a very, very good job as well that can get you everything you want. So that's the situation Alabama found itself in, because if those top 3 guys pulled out, what if it didn't get past Mike Norvell and Caleb DeBoer, or if it did get past them, I had no idea what was going to happen. That's why Caleb DeBoer had to take this
If
job.
Kalen DeBoer didn't take it, then I don't know what would have happened. And I recognize, and Kenny, I'll go to you on this because you're the beat writer there. You know what's up. There was no answer that was going to make us all feel warm inside. There wasn't a Kirby Smart that was just going to fall out of the sky. And Alabama, I think, is an interesting job. I don't know where it is on the pantheon of great jobs without Saban. Alabama isn't necessarily a talent-rich state in comparison to, places like Louisiana and Texas. I don't understand the geography of that. And they've had some really good years in the past few years in terms of top 100 player talent. But Alabama typically isn't as deep as some of the other southern states that are around it. Alabama has pillaged the state of Florida and has done so because their coach is a dog recruiter. And Jordan here is asking, are we sure he isn't a dog of a recruiter? No, we're not. No, we're not. He could be great. I'm not saying it's not. But when you hire somebody to take over for Nick Saban, and it's a question That's scary. What's your take on all this, Kenny?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's being said. And it goes back to, again, the loss of Travaris Robinson, because you look at his, all-time recruiting wins. It goes far beyond defensive backs. He was able to keep Jordan Burch in the state of South Carolina as a 5-star defensive end. He was one of the lead recruiters for Ryan Williams. And you think about that recruitment and where that's trending now that Robinson isn't going to stay on Alabama staff. You have to feel like that's probably trending away from Alabama. He's a receiver. So you think about all the different kind of hands that he has in all of these different recruitments. It is going to be imperative that DeBoer fills his staff with high-end elite recruiters with Southern ties. That's going to be a huge aspect of it. I think in a lot of ways, the offense will be able to recruit itself because he has proof of concept there with Washington. But on the defensive end, you're going to have to load that staff with either Alabama guys or SEC guys to be able to reinforce to recruits that even though Nick Saban is leaving, this is still going to be the Alabama defense. And that's where my attention kind of turns to, is how he feels that defensive staff and what they're going to be able to do to get kids to, commit to the program. And I think, again, to your point about how much Saban meant to Alabama from a recruiting aspect, that kind of spoke to what I was talking about earlier with, getting more NIL investments, is, being able to play for the greatest coach of all time. That means a lot on the recruiting trail. You might have a kid that might have a better situation at this school, or he's a, in-state Georgia kid or a Florida kid or whatever. And he's looking at Florida State, Georgia, and saying, I could probably play more here. I can make more money here, but this is Nick Saban. I'm gonna ride with, going with the greatest coach of all time. So it's gonna be an adjustment. I think it'll be really interesting to see what his first recruiting cycle looks like. Are the Alabama fans going to be in an uproar if it's not a top 5 class or a top 10 class? Yeah, they probably.
Yeah.
Kenny, I don't think they've been outside of the top 5 since 2010 or something.
Yeah, they've only been out of the top 3 twice in the last in the last 15 years or whatever.
And it was number 5.
Right. Yeah. So it's going to be a huge adjustment period, and it's kind of a projection hire. I think, Greg Byrne kind of has a track record of doing this, and I know it's not the same, obviously, but, he hired Nate Oates from Buffalo, which was, mid-major, and he was a proven winner at that level. He brought him into the men's basketball program, and now Alabama basketball is recruiting at a clip that they've never recruited at in their history. So he turned out to be a maven recruiter and a good basketball coach. So I think that in some ways Byrne is kind of projecting out for Kalen DeBoer of, okay, he hasn't gotten these recruiting wins. He necessarily hasn't had to at Washington, but that doesn't mean he can't do it. Obviously, he knows how to win, which is the most important thing. So that's what I would say, I guess, to maybe keep some Alabama fans' nerves at ease, is that Greg Byrne is kind of projecting out, and his track record of hiring has been, pretty strong in his tenure.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how
different Alabama. It's going to be a different vibe, the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. They might win. It just might not look the way it used to.
Right.
I always used to make this analogy, guys, but like, I am a journalist. Kenny's a journalist. Chris is a journalist. If you got hired to cover politics at the Washington Post, would you be qualified for that job?
No.
At the moment, no.
I think being the head coach at Washington and being the head coach at Alabama are 2 separate jobs. And it'd be very interesting to see if he learns how to cover politics.
Real quick, before we wrap up Alabama, Kenny, Isaiah Bond going to Texas. He said it was Saban's retiring was 100% the reason he left. Called it a business decision. That's a huge loss, and he's going to ball out at Texas with that offense. How big of a loss is that for Alabama?
Huge. I mean, with Bond's departure, Alabama will lose his 3 top pass catchers from last year with himself, Jermaine Burton, and I believe Amari Niblack, the tight end. I think those were their top 3 guys. So you're losing your top receivers. You don't really know kind of what's going on with Ryan Williams, somebody who reclassified, who you expect to kind of come in and join the fold. The rest of their signees are summer enrollees. So the receiving core is a little bit thin. And I think Isaiah Bond's situation is really interesting. And I know that, people are going to point to, NIL and Lamborghinis and all those things, but I do tend to believe him with this Nick Saban departure thing, because if it was just about the money, why didn't Isaiah Bond leave in the first transfer portal window when Bama's season ended?
Right.
It wasn't until Nick Saban retired that he quickly jumps in the portal, and now he has his destination. So, money had something to do with it, I'm sure. But Nick Saban leaving definitely was the tipping point in that, because he wasn't going anywhere otherwise. But it is a huge loss, and I would expect Alabama to be portal shopping in the spring window for some receiver help.
Good time for Texas here. A good time for Texas. You keep Steve
Right.
Sarkisian after he takes you to the playoff. Quinn Ewers is coming back. You're adding Isaiah Bond. I mean, this is like going back to when Nick Saban almost took the Texas job. Of now, Texas really is back. It's going into an SEC that doesn't have to compete with Nick Saban anymore. So Texas is a huge winner out of all this.
Jeremy Lambert here in the comments. Wasn't Toledo, Michigan State, Miami Dolphins, LSU totally different from Alabama? Yes. The greatest coach of all time did that. That's the bar we're trying to fill.
Yeah, exactly.
So, that's the thing. It's like, you're right. The greatest coach who's ever done it did it.
Kalen DeBoer has to be the greatest coach of all time to match what was done.
To match what Nick Saban did. So I think that we need to throw the Nick Saban. This is going to be the biggest adjustment of all. Alabama's going to have to live in a world now where they do not have the greatest coach of all time leading their program, and how are they going to do it? And Kenny, congratulations on all the subs and the stories and all the things that you're going to get for the next year, because honestly, as a beat writer, talk about invigorating, having all these different storylines and all the things that, like the recruiting philosophy, the coaching hires, the offense, the way it all looks. Like, is Alabama going to be going for it on 4th and 1 from its own 29 and spreading it out 5 wide next year? Like, there is so much to talk about, and Alabama is going to be a main fixture on this podcast, and hopefully you will too. But we have to move on to the next thing. And I got to say, Chris, I was taking a shower when Nick Saban retired, and I was in there, and it wasn't just like one of those like quick showers. It was a pleasurable shower in the sense that I was enjoying it. I know how that sounded. That's not how I was supposed to sound. I was just like letting the warm. It's been a long week, and it was a warm relaxation steam. And I come out, and I missed calls from Cam, and you and Nicole are already live. I almost threw my laptop against the wall. I was so frustrated because I didn't get my takes off, and then I knew I was leaving. And Jordan, that's also not true. We talked about Isaiah Bond quite a bit this year as he continued to become a better player for that team. That's not true at all. Okay, next thing on the list. Jim Harbaugh is meeting with the Chargers to potentially jump to the NFL. He already interviewed in LA was Leslie Frazier, the Bills defensive coordinator, Mike McDonald, the Ravens DC, Steve Wilkes, the 49ers
former Michigan
DC.
defense coordinator,
Yes.
Mike McDonald, former Michigan defense coordinator.
Todd Monken, Ravens offensive coordinator, Patrick Graham, Raiders offensive coordinator, and Kellen Moore. God, we're old. God, we are old. Offensive coordinator from the Chargers. So they are losing a lot at Michigan. Zach Zinter, Roman Wilson, Drake Nugent, Junior Colson, JJ McCarthy, and others. JJ, like I said at the top of the show, declared for the NFL draft. I know a lot of people. I thought it was funny when we were talking all year on this podcast about whether JJ McCarthy was that dude. The Michigan fans that got angry hearing it now, or the Michigan fans who said that he could use another year. I wonder what changed. It is an interesting dynamic, but Jim Harbaugh has repeatedly flirted with the NFL. It seems that's where the heart is for him. What's Michigan's program look like moving forward, and what do you think of this news, guys?
Real quick with Harbaugh in the NFL. There are, I think, 8 head coaching openings in the NFL. There might get to 10 if the Cowboys fire Mike McCarthy and if the Eagles fire Nick Sirianni, depending on what happens today, Monday. That's almost a third of the NFL. And almost everybody will want a piece of Jim Harbaugh. So I know there was some reporting late last week that people around Harbaugh think he might stay. He might. You never know with him. I would just be stunned.
He's not a very predictable human.
Right. It's impossible to predict what he will do. But he would have left 2 years ago if the Vikings offered him the job. They didn't. He interviewed with the Broncos last year. Like, the NFL is calling for him now in a way that they really weren't the last couple of years. That's just why I would be surprised if he stayed. He's accomplished everything he wants to accomplish. The only other thing he has that he wants to accomplish still is win a Super Bowl. And you can't do that at Michigan. So we'll see. I expect Harbaugh to do a ton of interviews with a lot of teams. That's going to be a process. We will see. But yeah, Michigan losing a ton, but we knew that this was a team full of 4th and 5th and 6th year guys. Really loaded team. Bruce wrote before the season that they might break the NFL draft record for picks. Now, considering some of the guys who are staying. That may not end up being the case, but JJ McCarthy's an interesting one. I believe he didn't pass for 150 yards in any of his last 5 games. I think. I don't remember what the Alabama game was. And yet, I think it's possible he has a more productive NFL career than a college career.
Well, he'll have to in the NFL. The NFL is a far more driven quarterback league. You're not going to have many games where you go 10 of 14 for 107 yards and a touchdown and win. So that's the thing that's interesting. I think the JJ McCarthy, is he elite discussion is going to be super fascinating in the next 4 or 5 months as we lead into the NFL draft. Because it is very funny. I have always thought that he wasn't elite. But the man just won a national championship, and he did so on a team that played its way against everybody all year. So we'll see what the NFL draft experts think. And honestly, if there's one thing that I've been wrong about, and I've been wrong about a lot of stuff, it's trying to project who's going to be a good quarterback in the league. I think that's the most hard thing to do. If you would have told me that Brock Purdy would be on a team that might win the Super Bowl this year and a 2-year starter, that's awesome, and Justin Fields would be so, I would have laughed in your face. If you go and you look at the colleges that the best quarterbacks in the NFL went to, I mean, it's kind of a crazy list. I mean, Texas Tech, Cal,
Wyoming.
It's very, very difficult to project who will be good. And it would not surprise me if JJ McCarthy was successful, because all he's been in college is successful. I know Jim Harbaugh refers to him as the best quarterback in Michigan history. I think you can make the case based on accomplishment. I don't know if he's the best quarterback to ever play there in terms of skill set. There was another pretty good one who played there, but best in college, sure. Chad Henne is who I was talking about. Is there another one?
John Navarre.
Tate Forcier.
Remember
that name?
Oh yeah. I covered.
That was a fun name.
A couple of games with that team.
Shea Patterson. There was a lot of good ones. I can't think of any other ones.
Shea Patterson. I wonder if he's still in the XFL.
He was the number 1 overall pick in the draft too. Let's not forget. It was just the XFL draft.
Yeah. It's hard to predict. And look, Jim Harbaugh said greatest quarterback in Michigan history, in terms of what they've done in college. Tom Brady was a 5th round pick, for a reason. He wasn't that accomplished or that great in college. It turned out it all depends where you go. Look what Tom Brady did. Look at Bill Belichick without Tom Brady. There's not much there. Look at every quarterback who plays for Kyle Shanahan. It depends where you go as a quarterback with everybody, coaching and players together. It all fits. And obviously there aren't stars in recruiting rankings and all that. You have to have everybody together. And if JJ McCarthy ends up in a really good spot with a coach who knows how to work quarterbacks, he will succeed. Look at Shane Steichen and Anthony Richardson this year. So all depends where he goes.
Yeah, I think the Brock Purdy comment was really astute, because in a lot of ways, that's kind of what Michigan was this year in college, like a college version of the 49ers. I know they might not have the Deebo Samuel or Christian McCaffrey or whatever, but that was an awesome team, great offensive line, strong running game, good skill players, really good defense, and a scheme that enabled McCarthy to just make the right decisions and to make the right reads and to put the ball where it needs to be in the playmakers' hands and let them do the rest. Very 49ers-esque. So if we're trying to project JJ McCarthy out to the NFL, probably have to be a situation like that, a team that is more so ready-made, that has a good offensive line and good skill players and a good defense, and they just need a quarterback to kind of come in there and stabilize things. I think the Falcons are a team that kind of fits that bill. They are picking 8th. That would be high for JJ McCarthy, but I'm just kind of spitballing here about kind of who his player comp might be and the type of situation that he would need to walk into in order to succeed.
But by the way, Caleb Williams has declared for the draft while we were recording. It was expected. We knew it.
Did Chicago say that they weren't going to draft him, or are we going to go into 4 months of Eli Manning grab ass here? I don't know what's going to happen.
I'm sure there'll be a lot with that.
Yes. So lastly, I just wanted to say congratulations, Jim Harbaugh. You proved me wrong in every step of the way, and I thought you should have been fired 3 years ago, and now you won a national championship and beat the game. When you play a game as a kid and you finally beat it, you beat the game. Go get that NFL money and go try to win a Super Bowl. Congratulations if you do leave on a wonderful career, and congratulations to Michigan for accomplishing something that seems almost impossible in my mind 2 years ago. So here, before we go on to the next segment, some potential candidates if he were to leave for the NFL. Sharon Moore, I think, in my opinion, is just going to be a slam dunk replacement, right? Like that's what it seems like. But we also have Brian Kelly, Lance Leipold, who reportedly turned down the Washington job, Chris Kleiman, and I don't know. Those are from Bruce. I'll add another one. Matt Campbell was a hot name a few years ago. I don't know if that moves the needle anymore, if the sun set on the Matt Campbell hysteria. But I feel like that's the type of job he probably would jump for too. I don't know if it's just going to go in any other direction, but just Sharon Moore. I think he earned it.
Yeah, the way that he schemed up Michigan's offense in the last few games of the season was masterful. I mean, especially that Alabama game, the way that he had that defense out of sorts was really notable. Probably the MVP of that game. I mean, kept J.J. McCarthy clean. He didn't get hit really at all. The running game was humming and continued on to the national championship as well. So to see his ascension from the second half of the year to now, and the games that he was coaching and the big wins that he was able to produce, in the way that Michigan's offense kind of found their stride towards the end of the season, I feel like he would have to be the leading candidate for Harbaugh's replacement.
Dude, he beat Ohio State. Like, you know how long it took for Michigan to do that?
Might have broken Ohio State.
How many coaches have come through and been unable to do it or barely able to do it? And he does it in his first try as an interim head coach with everything going on. Like, Sharon Moore is, to me, easily the guy you have to go with for all kinds of reasons. The players love him. He did a really good job. Like, he has more. I think the stat was he has more top 10 wins than James Franklin as Penn State's head coach. Like,
I think that might have been James Franklin might have been his first top 10 win.
And the first one was against James Franklin at Penn State. So like, I think the accomplishments are there. He knows the place. How often do you lose a coach like that and you have a backup on staff who has literally been the head coach for your biggest games and done it in
half a season of a national championship year?
It's never been more of an easier transition to somebody who is proven like that. Like, we've never.
I mean, I do think that there's more to it than doing well on game day, obviously, but having that experience in the coach, I think continuity is a big deal and has been a big deal in college football. So having that in place, I think, helps right the ship a little bit at Michigan. But also, too, it's certainly possible that, with the pieces in place that they had that got here, and without Harbaugh and some of the, talent that they've had, that it could be another long time before this happens again. And, replacing greatness and replacing a person like Jim Harbaugh, who is clearly unique and clearly a great coach, is not an easy thing to do. So we'll see what happens with Michigan. Let's go on to the next topic here, which is Texas A&M AD Ross Bjork being targeted for Ohio State's athletic director opening. He has been around for quite a bit of weirdness in college football. From 2012 to 2019, he was the director of athletics at Ole Miss, and he has been around at A&M since 2019. I think that it's an interesting situation for Ohio State because Gene Smith has been, I think, considered one of the best athletic directors in the country during his decades of being in that position. And, being at Ohio State, I got to know him pretty well. I think that's a major loss for Ohio State. The number one thing that I am very curious about when it comes to the athletic director, and the thing that jumped out into my mind is, you have an athletic director, if he takes the job, that is going to go to a place where the coach might be going on to the next season in the hot seat, who just paid Jimbo Fisher the biggest buyout in the history of mankind. Like, what is your take on Ross Bjork, Chris? And, how important do you think athletic director hires are for the trajectory of college football programs, especially one that's in a weird kind of intersection of its program like Ohio State is?
Yeah, look, like the Ohio State AD job, for people who don't care about NCAA world, is like the most influential AD job there is because of how big it is. It's the crown of the Big Ten. Gene Smith is on all sorts of committees and working groups and all these things. Like, Gene Smith was so influential in college sports with what he did in that job. And so if it ends up being Ross Bjork, kind of a stunner, honestly. Like when Gene Smith announced he was retiring, a lot of people thought this job could go anywhere. It could go someone outside of college sports. It could be an AD. Gene Smith has several of his proteges who are ADs at places like Pitt and UCLA and Washington State. And Notre Dame just hired an NBC TV executive to be its next AD. And instead, if it ends up being the guy who just paid out Jimbo Fisher a $76 million buyout, an extension that he was the AD for when it happened.
It's almost a sign of incompetence.
It's frankly stunning. And look, some people say, hey, Ross was kind of arm twisted into that. The boosters wanted to do it. Whatever the case, if that's the case, hey, I can't keep my boosters in order is not a selling point either. He was also the AD at Ole Miss when all the Hugh Freeze stuff went down and all the penalties that came along with that. He is really, really good at raising money. And we've seen that in capital projects and stuff like this. But at a time when college sports is undergoing existential change, humongous transformational stuff, is Ross Bjork the guy who's going to lead you into something new? CBAs
and help lead the sport into something new because of the influence Ohio State carries.
That's we'll see. Anything can happen, but I'm very surprised that is the hire. It feels unimaginative in terms of changing the dynamic of what's going on. It's another AD who raises a lot of money, and so I'm surprised. I'm surprised if it ends up being him and not one of the many other possibilities that were out there.
Yeah. It's
how big is the Ohio State AD job for as someone who was close to Ohio State for a long time? Like that pedestal.
I felt like every time there was a major shift in college football, Gene Smith was at the table discussing it.
Yeah.
Whether it be NIL, I mean, he was on the college football playoff committee. I know a lot of athletic directors are, but everything from the committee to all these working groups and everything I felt like Gene Smith's hands were in the pot of everything. And it is a very difficult scenario because on one hand, being the leader of the Ohio State football program is a very difficult job in and of itself. But being somebody who has such influence in the sport in general makes it a interesting job in terms of qualifications necessary in order to fill those shoes. And I don't know what people think about Gene Smith. Gene Smith was around for a lot of years, and sometimes things went wrong at Ohio State. Like there have been scandals and things, and he's been suspended himself at times. But I personally respect him and who he was and how good he was to me. And I think that filling those shoes are going to be, very, very, very hard thing to do. I think it's also important.
No,
go ahead. I was going to change the subject.
And looking down the road, by the way, if things aren't going well with Ryan Day, is he the guy who has to make that decision if they lose to Michigan again next year? Like who knows where things go
in year one? Yeah.
Would you trust him to be the guy to find the next coach? Because Ole Miss got demonstrably better after Bjork left, and Ole Miss NIL is doing great. Lane Kiffin's doing great. Basketball is doing great. Hired Chris Beard and all that stuff. Things are going well there. And so he was going to hire Mark Stoops to Texas A&M before the board said no. Then he came back with Mike Elko. I think we thought it was a good hire. So there's a lot of things in college sports and even at Ohio State could have to make a basketball hire soon here. With
for the last 7 years, strike that, not 7. Let's go 5. If there's one word that you could describe Texas A&M's football program with, what would it be? Because I have one, and it's not flattering.
Dysfunctional will probably be
that's my word.
Yep, same.
It's a pretty tough word.
Yeah.
When you're talking about the person who's in charge of that, not to mention the most shocking thing I've ever seen on television in my entire life was when Laramie Tunsil's gas mask situation at the NFL draft happened. I've never, I was I couldn't move. I felt like my body was in paralysis. I was so shocked by that. But, stuff happens and we'll see what goes. But Ohio State's football program, while we're on the subject, brought back basically its entire team. They lost Marvin Harrison Jr., but JT Tuimoloau is coming back. Jordan Hancock's coming back. Denzel Burke is coming back. A lot of players seem to be disgusted by the way that last year went, and Ohio State seems to be really, really, really focused and bought in on righting the ship there, and obviously bringing in Quinshon Judkins and Will Howard and all the things that they're trying to do there, they should have a very good football team next year. So that's something to keep track of. Other things that happened while I was trying to enjoy a dinner with my wife without worrying. Cam Ward went to Miami. Steve Sarkisian got an extension. Quinn Ewers returned. A lot happening here. Cam Ward, Miami's NIL is so good that it flipped the kid from the NFL. Can I make that
sort
joke?
of? Sort of.
I know.
I mean, like we knew when Cam Ward announced for the draft, everybody knew that. I think it was reported at the time that like he still might go to a college. I think he didn't hire an agent at the time or whatever that exactly was to preserve his eligibility. Max Olson, our colleague, said the draft feedback was a day 2 pick. And Cam Ward thinks he's a day 1 quarterback. So Miami needed a quarterback big time in the transfer portal, and they were kind of running out of guys. And so Cam Ward's a really good quarterback. And this is a prove it year for Miami, I think, with everything they've done in NIL. They've Mario Cristobal, all the money they put into that hire and everything. It's been a very underwhelming 2 years. They have to get it right next year, especially with Florida State doing what they did this year. Mike Norvell's coming back there. They are rolling. Like Miami's got to get it right this year. And Cam Ward at the quarterback, like there are not excuses for Mario Cristobal.
Yeah, I was interested with the comment of the day 2 feedback because I would think that, especially with how quarterback needy I feel like this draft is going to be, if Cam Ward goes through the process and he blows out the combine, maybe he gets a Senior Bowl invite and does those things, could he not, raise his profile to a potential fringe day 1 quarterback if he goes through the process and does really well? So I was really interested by that, and kind of, to your point about him and Mario Cristobal are kind of in this foxhole together of Cam Ward needs to have a really big year, for Miami, a lot more exposure there than Washington State in order to raise his profile. Mario Cristobal really needs a quarterback to come in there and stabilize things, because for as much dysfunction as Miami's football team had, the kind of musical chairs and the turnovers and the problems they had at quarterback was at the center of their issues this year.
This is a pretty deep quarterback draft, isn't it? I mean, we have Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, Michael Penix Jr., Bo Nix, JJ McCarthy, and others. Like, getting to be a day 1 pick in that group would be very difficult. But I also think that Cam Ward probably has to exist in a system where production isn't. It kind of existed in that. I'd like to see him go to a place that, a lot more is asked of him. And, I think that you have to put it on tape in order to be a day 1 pick. But next year, I also think there's probably a bigger window. I mean, hell, it's not very often you go into an NFL draft with Drake May and Caleb Williams. Those are 2 guys that could be generational talents in the NFL. So certainly interesting to track there. JJ McCarthy in the NFL draft. I cannot wait. It's going to be fun. Let's talk a little bit about Quinn Ewers coming back.
I think with Quinn Ewers, I think it's a lot we just talked about. It's a pretty loaded quarterback class. He's got some good wide receivers still. He had not a great year. He was okay. He was just very inconsistent. And now Quinn Ewers is going into his 4th year of college, 3rd year as a starting quarterback. I don't think we probably predicted that when he was coming out of high school, Ari. He was probably thought he'd be a three and done type of guy. But you saw a lot of Texas this year. What do you think about that?
I think that Quinn Ewers is kind of in the JJ McCarthy system of discussion when it comes to super productive player, but is he that guy? I think they're very different. I don't think that Quinn Ewers and JJ McCarthy play similarly, but I think that in big moments, Quinn Ewers has shined at times, but has not turned into a star. And I don't know what it's going to take to turn into a star, but even a team that made the college football playoff, you go into that wondering, is he the guy? And maybe we'd be thinking differently had he completed one more 12-yard pass at the end of the Washington game, but he didn't. So it is very fascinating to me. I think that the quarterback situation at Texas in general is fascinating to me. Malik Murphy has since transferred to Duke, but Arch Manning is waiting. He's waiting. So next year, the draft class for quarterbacks, and I think our producer just said this, and Chris Callahan in the chat, Quinn Ewers and Carson Beck coming into the draft next year, those seem to be the number 1 picks, unless I'm forgetting somebody. So it seems like a very good year for him to come back, get Texas back in the playoff potentially, have a good year in the SEC. Stay healthy is another thing, because he's never stayed healthy in his career. and try to work his way into a day one pick. And, we've seen NFL drafts where 5 or 6 quarterbacks get taken in the first round, and that might have been the point that Kenny was trying to make. So I think coming back is interesting. I think he has a lot more in terms of star power and, that next gear to hit that he hasn't really hit. That's ahead for him. They're going to have really good players. I know A.D. Mitchell and Xavier Worthy are both gone, right? A.D. Mitchell's not coming back, right?
Yeah, he declared.
So it's going to be a new receiver room, but they've got Isaiah Bond. He's got a chance to do something to increase his draft stock, but certainly a crazy, hectic week over the weekend. And it does feel like it's been a month since the national championship game. Kenny, Chris, did I miss anything?
Oh, real quick on Quinn Ewers, he was not good in that Sugar Bowl. By the way, he was okay, but he did not go out and win you the game. Especially
Texas didn't even have the ball for the entire third quarter,
and they were kept running
turning
the ball,
it over.
They
ran. I don't know. I don't know that I agree with that. You think he was also not good?
He was not great. He got some numbers toward the end of that game as they kind of got back into it, but they also didn't run the ball as much. The turnovers were bad. Bunko Penix made plays, but it is interesting. Arch Manning, is he going to be on the bench for 2 years? Did we think that was possible, or do we think he's cool with that? I mean, I guess at this point he probably is. All right, we don't know.
My shoulders are extended high. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know.
I guess we'll see during the spring portal window. That's his next opportunity to enter in. I guess we'll go through spring practice and see what happens. But I think it is, especially if you think about what Quinn Ewers did to Alabama in week 2, you would think that if he would have continued on that type of trajectory, he would obviously be in the NFL draft. So, so both of y'all,
Kenny and I were sitting next to each other.
It was unbelievable what he was doing in that game.
Yeah. I mean, I looked over to Kenny. I was like, damn.
Yeah.
You remember.
This guy is exactly. It's this guy's a solidified, first round pick at that point. And another name that I'll throw in there for next year's quarterback class is another quarterback who had really, really high stock early in the year and kind of faded toward the end, will be Shedeur Sanders.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, our RG3 thinks the Cowboys
I was going to say
Deion Sanders and go get
and draft somebody who isn't even in the draft this year. So that was asinine. But
what, the RG3 comments? It was not serious. I did not take that as
joking.
Serious.
Okay.
I don't know if he was joking, but I think he was just it wasn't a serious
Well, guys, we're an hour and 12 minutes into
this. A lot happened. It's been 3 months since Michigan won the national championship, and less than a week ago, because it's early Monday we're recording this.
No more January vacations, even if it's a weekend getaway. I learned my lesson. Hopefully I didn't ruin my wife's birthday. It was kind of I felt pretty anxious out there with all this stuff happening, but it was a crazy week. Kenny, thanks so much for joining us. And let me just formally introduce him, because I don't think I did a good job at the beginning of the show. He is Kennington Smith III, our Alabama beat writer and rising star in this industry. That's Chris Vanini, national college football reporter with The Athletic. I'm Ari Wasserman. Be sure to subscribe to the Until Saturday feed, both in the YouTube channel and in the podcast feed, wherever you listen to podcasts. Be sure to also sign up for the Athletics Until Saturday newsletter, where you'll get your daily fill of college football news delivered directly to your inbox. You do not have to be subscribed to The Athletic in order to receive that inbox email, but shortly after getting it, I think you will be subscribed, because we do a lot of really good stuff at The Athletic. Very proud to be a part of that team.
Quick. I wanted to jump in one last shout out. Jeremy Sharp, the director of football communications at UNC, who listens to this podcast. He watches this podcast on his television.
He says I sit too.
He said
my head's too big.
Yeah, Jeremy. He was working communication for the CFP at the championship game. Said he watches this podcast on his television. Hadn't heard that one before, and he loves Ari's big head. So thanks for listening, Jeremy.
No, he says that my head is too big to close to the screen, and when I'm sitting here like this, I feel like I'm lining up perfectly with you guys. But Jeremy, it's just like I'm in your living room, bud. Embrace the weirdness. And sorry for the weird shower comment. It was just a long, relaxing shower. I used the word pleasurable. I shouldn't have said that. I should have said relaxing. That's what I meant. Thank you all for listening to us live on the YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us everywhere. We put out this podcast. I'm going to shut up now. We'll see you guys later in the week. That was Until Saturday.